A quiet life. The Tiffany lamp spilled a soft, intricate glow, etching patterns onto the spines of Aaron's well-loved books. Dust motes danced in the quiescent air, illuminated by the warm light. He was cocooned in his favorite armchair, a forgotten mug of chamomile cooling on the oak side table, a hefty volume of historical fiction open on his chest. The only sounds were the hushed crackle of the gas fireplace and the far-off call of an owl. This was his sanctuary, a meticulously cultivated haven of solitary contentment. The scent of aged paper mingled with the subtle aroma of tea, companions more steadfast than most people. He embraced the predictable rhythm of his days, finding solace in silent conversations with authors long departed, a stark contrast to the outside world's unpredictable churn. His fingers traced a delicate medieval tapestry illustration, depicting a forgotten battle. He conjured images of clashing swords, the cries of men, a world profoundly alien to his peaceful existence. A faint smile touched his lips, grateful for the protective distance, the profound quietude. He valued the personal space, a vital buffer against the jarring noises and abrupt movements that often left him feeling adrift. Here, within these walls, he was secure, enveloped in a self-made predictability. Then, a sudden, dissonant vibration. His phone, overlooked on the cushion beside him, buzzed with an insistent, unfamiliar pulse against the soft fabric. He frowned, his peaceful bubble momentarily punctured. Few people contacted him after dusk, even fewer with a number he didn't instantly recognize. He retrieved it, by squinting at the glowing screen. The name emblazoned there stole his breath. Blake. A name echoing from a former life. A different Aaron. A past as remote as the medieval conflicts in his book. He hadn't heard from Blake in years. Not since a blurry photo from some arid desert outpost had arrived in his inbox, accompanied by a terse, uninformative caption. He hesitated, his thumb poised over the answer icon. What could Blake possibly want? Good news? Bad news? A familiar unease tightened Aaron's stomach. He pressed answer, lifting the phone to his ear with a slight tremor. Aaron, is that really you? The voice on the other end was rough, gravelly, yet unmistakably Blake's. An edge of weariness, absent from his memories, clung to it. Blake, it's been a long time, Aaron managed, his voice a little hoarse. He shifted in his chair, and suddenly restless. The quiet serenity of his evening had evaporated. Yeah, a long time. Look, I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't important. I'm back, discharged. And well, things aren't exactly going to plan out here. Blake's voice was strained, each word an audible effort. Aaron could almost discern the unspoken anxieties swirling beneath the surface. Back? Where are you? Aaron asked, his mind racing. He remembered Blake as a force of nature, boisterous and confident, always up for a challenge. This voice was brittle, almost shattered. I'm in the city, staying with a buddy, but it's not working out. Too much noise, too many people. I need somewhere quiet, somewhere I can breathe. There was a pause, a moment where the silence stretched taut between them, brimming with unspoken pleas. I remember your place, and out in the sticks, always so damn quiet. I know it's a huge ask, but could I crash on your couch for a bit, just until I figure things out? Aaron closed his eyes, picturing his carefully constructed home, his solitary existence. It was a substantial request. Blake, with his unpredictable energy and military background, was the antithesis of Aaron's tranquil world. His mind immediately conjured potential disruptions, late-night talks, unexpected visitors, the sheer presence of another person infringing on his quiet space. His meticulously crafted comfort zone felt suddenly vulnerable. But then, another image surfaced. Blake, years ago, after Aaron's parents had passed. Blake had been there, a solid, comforting presence, his usual bravado tempered by genuine empathy. He'd brought meals, assisted with arrangements, and simply sat with Aaron through the oppressive silence of grief. Blake had been truly kind when Aaron had needed it most. He owed him. "Aaron, you still there?" Blake's voice was laced with a fresh wave of anxiety. "Yeah, I'm here," Aaron said, making his decision. The warmth of old affection, tinged with a fresh current of concern, settled over him. "Of course. You can stay. For as long as you need. My guest room is always ready." He didn't have a guest room, not really. It was more of a storage space, filled with old boxes and forgotten treasures. But he would prepare it. For Blake, he would prepare it. "Seriously? You're a lifesaver, Aaron. I owe you. Big time." The relief in Blake's voice was palpable, a fragile hope blossoming in the stark wasteland of his desperation. "Don't worry about it. Just let me know when you'll be here," Aaron said, already mentally reorganizing his silent house, preparing it for the impending shift. The quiet life he cherished was about to be irrevocably altered. A knot of worry tightened in his chest. But beneath it, a tiny flicker of something else. An almost forgotten anticipation. The new roommate. The doorbell chimed. A bright, intrusive sound that cut through the evening quiet. Aaron, who had been meticulously arranging a stack of books on his coffee table for the 5th time, straightened with a sigh. It was earlier than he'd expected, but then, Blake had always been a man of impulsive action. He opened the door to find Blake standing on his porch, a worn canvas duffel bag slung over one shoulder. His face, usually animated and quick to smile, was drawn, shadowed by fatigue. He managed a tired grin, but it didn't quite reach his eyes, which held a weary resignation. "Hey, Aaron," Blake said, his voice a little hoarse. "Thanks for doing this. Really?" Aaron nodded, stepping aside to let him in. The scent of Blake, dust, stale air, and something vaguely metallic, like gunpowder mixed with sweat, entered his meticulously clean home, an immediate disruption to the crisp, lemon-scented air. "No problem," Aaron replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. He gestured vaguely down the hall. "Guest room's ready. It's got a bed, a small dresser. Nothing fancy." Blake stepped inside, his boots making faint scuffs on the polished hardwood. He looked around the living room, his gaze lingering on the carefully curated bookshelves, the minimalist artwork, the single, thriving fern in the corner. His presence, large and restless, immediately filled the space that Aaron had so carefully emptied of excess. "Looks peaceful," Blake murmured, a hint of wistful longing in his voice. He shifted the duffel bag, its weight seeming to pull at his shoulder. Aaron led the way down the short corridor, his steps silent compared to Blake's heavier tread. The guest room, usually a sanctuary of quiet emptiness, now felt expectant. The bed was made with fresh linens, a soft grey duvet neatly folded at the foot. A small nightstand held a lamp and a glass of water. "Bathroom's just across the hall," Aaron explained, pointing. "Towels are in the cabinet." Blake dropped his duffel bag onto the floor with a soft thud. He ran a hand through his short, sandy hair, his shoulders slumping slightly. "Perfect, man. More than I could ask for. Vinny?" He walked over to the window, peering out at the familiar quiet street. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the neighborhood. Just then, a car horn blared sharply from somewhere down the block, a sudden, piercing sound. Aaron watched as Blake flinched violently, his shoulders hunching, his head snapping around. His eyes, for a split second, were wide and unfocused, a distant, haunted sadness clouding their depth. It was a raw, involuntary reaction, gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a forced composure. "Damn city drivers," Blake muttered, attempting a laugh that didn't quite materialize. He turned away from the window, but the brief flicker of vulnerability had been enough for Aaron to see beneath the tired smile. "You okay?" Aaron asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. Blake nodded, though his gaze still seemed to be seeing something beyond the walls of the room. "Yeah, just not used to the noise anymore. Out there, it's different." His hand went to his neck, rubbing the back of it as if to soothe a phantom ache. Aaron didn't press him. He understood, to a degree, the jarring transition from one world to another, though his own experiences had been of a different nature. He recognized the flicker of fear in Blake's eyes, the way his body had tensed. It was a stark contrast to the carefree, confident Blake he remembered. "Well, it's pretty quiet around here," Aaron offered, trying to reassure him. "Neighbors keep to themselves." Blake managed a more genuine smile this time, though it was still tinged with weariness. "Good. Quiet sounds. Really good right now." He looked at Aaron, a silent gratitude passing between them. "Seriously, Aaron, thank you for everything." Aaron merely gave a slight nod, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. The disruption had begun. His quiet sanctuary, once a fortress against the world, now had a breach, and he could already feel the shifting dynamics of his carefully constructed solitude. He wondered what else Blake would bring into his world besides a duffel bag and a haunted gaze. Shadows in the night. The first night was the hardest. Aaron, a creature of habit, found sleep elusive even in the quiet hum of his own home. The scent of gunpowder, faint but persistent, clung to the air, a phantom limb of Blake's arrival. He'd left the guest room door ajar, a silent invitation he now regretted. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of the wind against the windows, he felt amplified, tinged with an unfamiliar anxiety. Just as the early hours began to soften the edges of the dark, a strangled cry tore through the silence. It was a sound that didn't belong in Aaron's meticulously ordered world. Raw, guttural, filled with a primal terror that made his heart lurch. He sat bolt upright, disoriented, his breath catching in his throat. Another sound followed. A desperate, choked sob, then a sudden, jarring thud. Aaron scrambled out of bed, his bare feet cold on the polished wood floor. He moved through the living room, the moonlight painting stark shadows across the furniture, towards the guest room. The door, previously ajar, was now completely open. A sliver of light from the street lamp outside illuminated Blake's form, twisted in the sheets, his body rigid, his sweat plastering dark strands of hair to his forehead. He was thrashing, his eyes wide and unseeing, murmuring fragments of words Aaron couldn't quite decipher, but understood were born of some horrific memory. Aaron hesitated in the doorway, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He wasn't equipped for this. His life was a carefully constructed fortress against chaos, and Blake, even in his sleep, was a wrecking ball. He considered waking him, but the sheer intensity of Blake's distress gave him pause. What if startling him made it worse? He watched for a long moment as Blake's struggles slowly subsided, replaced by a ragged, gasping breath. The silence that followed was heavier than before, thick with the residue of terror. Aaron retreated, not wanting to intrude further on such raw vulnerability. He went back to his own bed, but sleep was a distant memory. He lay there, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound for what felt like an eternity, until a new sound emerged, a soft, rhythmic padding. Blake was pacing. Aaron could hear the subtle shift of weight, the faint whisper of fabric against skin, as Blake moved back and forth in the hallway just outside his closed bedroom door. The rhythm was hypnotic, unsettling. Each step was a testament to a restless mind, a body that couldn't find peace. Aaron imagined him out there, a shadow in the night, his gaze probably fixed on nothing, his thoughts far away in some hellish landscape. He pictured the haunted sadness in Blake's eyes, the way his shoulders had slumped under the weight of an unseen burden. He knew, intellectually, that Blake was grateful for the shelter, for a place to simply be. But that gratitude was intertwined with a profound, debilitating pain. A new kind of worry began to unfurl within Aaron. It wasn't the familiar worry of a forgotten bill or a misplaced item. This was a deeper, more visceral unease, a sense of responsibility he hadn't asked for, a vulnerability he hadn't anticipated. Blake's presence wasn't just a temporary disruption, it was a fundamental shift, an intrusion of a world Aaron had deliberately avoided. He was no longer just an observer of his own quiet life. He was now a silent witness to another's suffering, and the weight of that witness felt immense. He listened to the steady, soft pacing in the dark hallway until the first sliver of dawn painted the sky, promising a new day, but offering no real solace. A stormy embrace. The oppressive silence of the house, punctuated only by Blake's restless pacing, had gnawed at Aaron for hours. He'd tried to read, but the words blurred, his mind replaying the raw anguish he'd witnessed. Sleep was a phantom, always just out of reach, leaving him hollowed out, a raw nerve. He was accustomed to the predictable rhythm of his own solitude, the comforting hum of his own thoughts. Now, a dissonant chord vibrated through his meticulously constructed world, a constant reminder of another's suffering, another's unsettling presence. A distant rumble, faint at first, then growing into a low growl, stirred the pre-dawn stillness. The air thickened, charged with an unseen energy. Rain began to patter against the window pane, a gentle whisper that quickly escalated into a furious drumming. Wind howled through the eaves, a mournful cry that seemed to amplify the disquiet within the house. Aaron closed his eyes, willing sleep to claim him, but the storm outside mirrored the tempest within. Then, a sudden, blinding flash of lightning split the darkness, illuminating the room in a stark, fleeting tableau. Almost simultaneously, a deafening crack of thunder ripped through the air, shaking the very foundations of the old house. The sound was visceral, rattling the bones, vibrating through the floorboards. It was the kind of thunder that made you jump, made your heart pound, a primeval roar that silenced all other thoughts. From Blake's room, a piercing, guttural scream tore through the fading echo of the thunder. It wasn't a cry of pain, not entirely, but a shriek of pure, unadulterated terror, a sound that clawed at Aaron's chest and stole his breath. He was out of bed before he fully registered the impulse, his bare feet slapping against the cool wood of the hallway floor. The door to Blake's room was ajar, a sliver of darkness framed by the faint glow of the storm outside. Aaron pushed it open further, his hand trembling slightly. The room was a chaotic tableau, shadows dancing wildly with each flash of lightning. Blake was a crumpled heap on the floor beside his bed, tangled in his sheets, his body convulsing with uncontrolled shudders. His eyes, wide and unfocused, darted around the room, seeing things that weren't there, caught in the throes of a nightmare that had bled into waking. "Blake!" Aaron's voice was a rough whisper, barely audible over the renewed assault of the rain against the window. He knelt beside him, a knot of dread tightening in his stomach. Blake didn't seem to hear him, lost in his own terrifying world. His breathing was ragged, punctuated by choked gasps, and a thin sheen of sweat covered his brow. Another violent crash of thunder erupted, closer this time, and Blake flinched violently, a whimpering sound escaping his lips. He thrashed, his hands reaching out blindly, desperate for something to anchor him, something to ward off the invisible horrors. His fingers, surprisingly strong, clamped onto Aaron's arm, a grip that was both desperate and painful. Aaron didn't pull away. The unexpected contact, the sheer force of Blake's fear, sent a jolt through him, a strange mix of alarm and a primal urge to protect. Blake's grip tightened, his knuckles white, and he scrambled closer, his head burying itself against Aaron's chest. The sudden weight, the unfamiliar closeness, that was startling. Aaron could feel the frantic beat of Blake's heart against his own ribs, the rapid, shallow breaths ghosting against his skin. Blake was shaking uncontrollably, his entire body rigid with fear. He clung to Aaron with a desperation that was heartbreaking, a primal need for safety in the face of an unseen threat. Aaron hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mind reeling from the abrupt shift in their dynamic. This wasn't just a troubled sleep. This was a complete unraveling. Instinct, raw and unbidden, took over. Aaron wrapped his arms around Blake, a hesitant embrace at first, then firming as Blake burrowed deeper, seeking refuge. He felt Blake's cold skin against his own, the tremor that ran through him. He could smell the faint scent of old gunpowder that still clung to him, now mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Aaron held him, not knowing what else to do, his hand coming to rest on Blake's head, gently stroking his hair. He could feel the tension in Blake's shoulders, the way his muscles bunched under Aaron's touch. The storm outside raged, a symphony of wind and rain and thunder. But for a moment, in the small, shadowed room, the only sound that mattered was Blake's ragged breathing, slowly, imperceptibly, beginning to steady against Aaron's chest. Holding on the thunder had quieted to a distant grumble, a fading echo of the storm's fury. But the storm within Blake still raged. His body, racked by the nightmare's aftershocks, slowly began to still against Aaron. Aaron held him, a strange confluence of fear and fierce protectiveness surging through him. He could feel the frantic beat of Blake's heart against his own chest, the tremor in his friend's limbs. Blake's grip on Aaron's shirt was bone white, desperate. "It's okay, Blake," Aaron murmured, his voice a low, steady current in the agitated air. "You're here. You're safe." Blake's head shifted, bumping against Aaron's shoulder. His eyes, though still wide and unfocused, seemed to register Aaron's presence, a flicker of awareness amidst the terror. A soft whimper escaped him, a sound so raw and childlike it twisted something deep inside Aaron. "Just breathe with me, Blake," Aaron continued, his own breathing deliberately slow and even. In, out. That's it. He began to gently stroke Blake's hair, the damp strands clinging to his fingers. The soft contact seemed to ground Blake, pulling him further from the nightmare's suffocating grip. The convulsions lessened, replaced by a deep, shuddering sigh. Blake's grip loosened on Aaron's shirt, his fingers now simply resting there, a fragile connection. His eyes, still bleary, found Aaron's. There was a raw vulnerability in their depths, an unspoken plea that pierced through Aaron's carefully constructed detachment. He found himself responding to it instinctively, a new current of empathy flowing through him. He couldn't be the detached observer anymore. This was Blake, suffering, right here in his arms. "You're okay," Aaron repeated, his voice barely a whisper now, filled with a tenderness he hadn't known he possessed. He felt Blake lean into him, a heavy weight of exhaustion and lingering fear. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a profound stillness, a stark contrast to the tempest that had just raged in the small room. Slowly, carefully, Aaron shifted, guiding Blake to lie back against the pillows. Blake's hand, still trembling slightly, found Aaron's and clung to it. Aaron didn't pull away. He sat on the edge of the bed, a sentinel in the encroaching dawn, holding Blake's hand as if it were the most precious, fragile thing in the world. The warmth of Blake's skin against his was a tangible anchor, a silent promise. He continued to speak, softly, intermittently. Not about the nightmare, not about the war, but about simple, mundane things. The way the rain sounded on the roof, the chill in the air, the distant cry of an owl. His words were a soothing balm, a counterpoint to the violent imagery that had consumed Blake moments before. He felt Blake's breathing deepen, the frantic rhythm slowly giving way to a more even cadence. The tremors in his hand subsided, though his grip on Aaron's remained firm, a lifeline in the darkness. Time stretched, marked only by the slow, deliberate pulse of Blake's breath and the growing ache in Aaron's back. He watched the subtle changes in Blake's face as sleep reclaimed him, the furrow in his brow smoothing out, the tension easing from his jaw. It was a slow, arduous journey back to peace, but Blake was making it. Aaron stayed, unmoving, until the first faint streaks of grey light began to filter through the curtains, painting the room in muted tones. Blake was deep in sleep now, his chest rising and falling with a steady, peaceful rhythm. His hand, still intertwined with Aaron's, had relaxed, but the connection remained. Looking at Blake, truly seeing him in the gentle light of dawn, Aaron felt a profound shift within himself. The careful boundaries he had built around his solitary life had not just been breached, they had been obliterated by the raw force of Blake's pain. He was no longer just a distant friend, a temporary guest. He was a responsibility, a vulnerability Aaron had unknowingly welcomed into his meticulously ordered world. And strangely, terrifyingly, he didn't want to let go. He didn't want to let go of Blake's hand, didn't want to let go of this new, uncomfortable, yet undeniably significant connection. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that his life had irrevocably changed. With a final, lingering squeeze of Blake's hand, a silent vow to himself, Aaron gently extricated his fingers. He rose from the bed, moving with a quiet reverence, and left the room, leaving Blake to his much-needed rest, and himself to a new, an unfamiliar dawn. Daylight mask. Sunrise, splintered by the ancient pines, striped the kitchen floor. Aaron, an early riser, had coffee brewing, its robust scent a warm rebuttal to dawn's lingering bite. He was rinsing a ceramic mug when Blake, rubbing sleep from his eyes, ambled in. For a beat, Blake was simply himself, the familiar slump of his shoulders, the tousled dark hair, the slight grimace as he blinked against the light. "Morning," Blake mumbled, his voice a little raspy, yet devoid of tremor or any echo of the night's terror. He poured a mug, steam caressing his face. Slept like a rock, actually. First time in ages. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Aaron offered a silent nod of affirmation, observing Blake intently, seeking any tell, any faint spark of the raw vulnerability he'd cradled hours earlier. But Blake's face was a carefully constructed facade of normalcy. He leaned against the counter, sipping, then pushed off with a sudden surge of energy. "That old creek fence is practically disintegrating. We should tackle it today. Remember that lumber from last year's storm, out in the shed? Might be enough for repairs." His enthusiasm felt a shade too bright, a touch too eager. Aaron recognized the tactic, a flurry of activity to smother discomfort. He noted how Blake's gaze skittered, fixing on the worn linoleum, the chipped window frame, everywhere but Aaron's face. Then, a quicksilver flicker, his eyes snagged on Aaron's before darting away. A shy, almost furtive acknowledgement. It vanished before Aaron could fully grasp it, yet it was there. A minute fracture in the meticulously built pretense. "Sounds good," Aaron said, his voice calm, level. He didn't press, didn't acknowledge the fleeting glance. There was no need. The bond forged in the night's crucible was too potent for a morning's charade to break. He knew. Blake knew. That was enough. After oatmeal and toast, they headed for the shed. The air was crisp, pungent with pine needles and damp earth. Blake moved with renewed vigor, retrieving tools, a tape measure, and several dusty planks. He was all business, dissecting the merits of fasteners, the optimal way to brace a sagging post. Aaron listened, offering quiet suggestions, handing him tools. It was a familiar rhythm, one they'd fallen into countless times, but today, an unspoken current, a silent hum of understanding, suffused their shared space. They worked in tandem, the rhythmic thud of a hammer against wood punctuating the quiet. The sun climbed, warming their backs. Blake, still talking, detailing his repairs, paused mid-sentence, his gaze drifting to Aaron. This time, the look lingered a fraction longer, a question in his eyes, a flicker of something raw and unmasked. It vanished again, quick as a breath, as he picked up a nail and resumed hammering, but Aaron had seen it, the vulnerability, the quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired. This new connection was a delicate thing, still nascent, still evolving, yet undeniably present. The fence post, once crooked and rotting, now stood straight and resolute. Blake stepped back, wiping a bead of sweat, a genuine smile replacing his earlier forced cheer. "There," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Good as new." Aaron met his gaze, and this time Blake didn't avert his eyes. No pretense clouded them now, only a quiet acceptance, a shared understanding. The daylight mask had slipped, if only for a moment, revealing the deeper truth. The fence was mended, but something far more significant had been repaired between them. The settling silence was no longer merely comfortable, it was rich with unspoken words, with a nascent tenderness that hummed between them, a promise of something profound and new. Silent comfort. The oppressive stillness of the night was suddenly fractured by a choked sob, a sound that tore through the fabric of Aaron's slumber like a jagged blade. It was softer than the guttural cries of the previous night, more muted, but no less potent in its sorrow. His eyes, already accustomed to the gloom, snapped open. He knew that sound, knew its source. He didn't hesitate. The old floorboards creaked a familiar protest beneath his bare feet as he padded down the short hallway. Blake's door stood ajar, a sliver of darkness within darkness. Through the gap, he could discern the hunched form on the bed, shoulders shaking, a low, keening sound escaping the lips that had, just hours earlier, been stretched in a forced, almost brittle smile. Blake was trying to stifle it, he realized, trying to swallow the pain, to make himself small and silent, as if his grief were a shameful secret. Aaron pushed the door open a fraction wider, enough to slip inside without a sound. He didn't speak. Words felt clumsy, intrusive. A violation of the fragile space Blake had retreated into. Instead, he moved to the wall opposite the bed, a few feet away, and sank to the floor. The cool wood against his skin was a grounding sensation. He drew his knees up, resting his forearms on them, and simply existed. His presence was a quiet anchor in the stormy sea of Blake's distress. Blake's head was buried in his pillow, the soft fabric absorbing the worst of his sobs. But even through the muffling, the raw anguish was palpable. Aaron watched the rhythmic tremors that racked Blake's body, a silent testament to the terror that still clung to him even in wakefulness. He didn't offer a hand, didn't make a comforting sound. He merely watched, a steadfast sentinel. He had learned, slowly, painfully, that sometimes the most profound comfort lay not in doing, but in simply being. Minutes stretched, an eternity measured in the shallow, ragged breaths Blake struggled to draw. Gradually, the intensity of the sobs began to wane, replaced by hiccuping gasps, then quiet sniffles. Blake's body slowly uncurled, his head lifting from the pillow, eyes still squeezed shut. He took a shuddering breath, then another, and then, as if sensing the shift in the room's energy, his eyelids fluttered open. His gaze, red-rimmed and unfocused, swept across the dark room, stumbling over Aaron's form in the shadows. There was a flicker of surprise, then something else. A softening, a subtle easing of the tension that had gripped him. He didn't speak either, just stared, as if seeing Aaron for the first time, or perhaps for the first time truly acknowledging his presence. There was no embarrassment, no attempt to mask his vulnerability this time. The raw emotion was too potent, too fresh. Aaron met his gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of understanding that needed no translation. Blake's eyes lingered on him, searching and finding something he desperately needed. The silent vigil continued. The air in the room, once thick with Blake's despair, began to thin, to breathe. After a long while, Blake shifted, pulling his knees up to his chest, mirroring Aaron's posture in the gloom. He rested his chin on them, watching Aaron with a quiet intensity. The tears had stopped, though a sheen of moisture still glistened on his cheeks in the faint moonlight filtering through the window. He looked like a lost boy, adrift in a world too big and too harsh. Aaron remained still, a statue of quiet support. He felt the subtle shift in the atmosphere, the lessening of the unspoken tension. It was a fragile peace, easily shattered, but a peace nonetheless. He was no longer just an observer. He was a silent participant in Blake's healing, a steady presence in the chaotic aftermath of terror. Finally, Blake let out a long, slow breath, a sound that seemed to release a fraction of the weight he carried. He didn't say thank you, didn't apologize for the disturbance. He simply closed his eyes again, not in sleep, but in a profound sense of relief. He knew Aaron was there. He knew he wasn't alone. And for now, that was enough. Aaron stayed on the floor, unmoving, until the first hint of pre-dawn light began to paint the sky outside the window a pale grey. He waited until Blake's breathing had deepened into the even rhythm of true sleep. Then, as quietly as he had entered, he rose and slipped back into his own room, leaving the door ajar, a silent invitation, a promise of continued presence. The silent comfort had worked its subtle magic, establishing a new, unspoken pattern between them. When the darkness brought its terrors, Blake would seek Aaron, and Aaron would be there. Stories and solace. Blake's tear-laden eyes finally met Aaron's. "Stay," he croaked, his voice a raw whisper. "Just until I fall asleep." The plea, a fragile bridge across a chasm of despair, hung in the air. Aaron, accustomed to these silent vigils, simply nodded. He remained on the floor, allowing the quiet understanding to settle like a comforting shroud. The digital clock glowed an eerie red. 2:47 a.m. Blake pulled his knees closer, his gaze lost in the dimness. The storm within, though momentarily quelled by Aaron's presence, still rumbled distantly. Aaron watched, a quiet sentinel, a dull ache of weariness throbbing in his temples. He knew, with surprising clarity, he would stay as long as needed. Minutes stretched, elastic and heavy. The only sounds were the distant hum of the refrigerator and the gentle creak of the old house. Then a tentative thought bloomed in Aaron's mind. He rose, slow and deliberate, careful not to shatter the fragile peace. He walked to the small bookshelf, a repository of worn paperbacks and leather-bound classics. His finger traced the spines, a familiar ritual. What could offer solace, he wondered? Something steady, enduring. His hand found an old copy of Treasure Island, its cover faded, pages soft with age. Returning to his spot, leaning against the cool wall, he opened the book. "Mind if I read?" he murmured. Blake blinked, pulling his gaze from the shadows. "Read?" "Yeah, just something quiet. Helps me sometimes." It was a convenient half-truth. He wasn't reading for himself now. Blake hesitated, then offered a small nod. "Okay." Aaron began, his voice a steady drone, Robert Louis Stevenson's words filling the quiet. He read of Jim Hawkins, the Admiral Benbow Inn, of sea salt air, and the promise of adventure. No dramatic flourish, just a calm, even cadence, allowing the story to unfold. At first, Blake remained still, breathing shallowly, his focus elsewhere. But as Aaron continued, the rhythm of the words, the familiar yet distant world they conjured, began its subtle magic. The tension eased from Blake's shoulders, his grip on his knees loosening. He slowly unwound, stretching beneath the duvet, eyes now closed. Aaron watched him, pausing occasionally. The worry lines around Blake's mouth softened, his brow unfurrowed. The restless energy that had pulsed from him earlier dissolved, replaced by profound stillness. Not the agitated stillness of suppression, but the genuine quietude of a mind finally at rest. He read for what felt like an hour, perhaps more. His voice a constant, gentle presence. The story flowed. A quiet river carrying Blake away from the jagged edges of his memories. The weight of the book, the smooth texture of the old pages, grounded him. He wasn't just reading. He was building a sanctuary, word by word, for Blake to inhabit. When he finally looked up, the room remained steeped in shadow, but a hint of pre-dawn grey seeped through the blinds. Blake was deeply asleep, his breathing even and soft. A true sleep, Aaron realized. Not the fitful, anxious dozing that usually followed a nightmare. He closed the book gently, marking his place with a discarded receipt. The quiet intimacy of the past hour settled around him, warm and unexpected. He had offered more than mere presence. He had offered a temporary escape, a moment of unburdened peace. And in doing so, he felt a shift within himself. A quiet acknowledgement of the profound responsibility and connection that now bound them. He remained on the floor until the first birdsong pierced the pre-dawn quiet. A sentinel guarding Blake's fragile sleep. His own heart a little lighter, a little more vulnerable than it had ever been. Confusing smiles. The morning's gentle illumination, filtered through the pale curtains, bathed the room in a palette of soft greys and muted yellows. Blake stirred, the dissolving fragments of a dream. A tranquil shore, the rhythmic hush of waves. A comforting hand in his, receding into the waking world. For the first time in what felt like an age, he awoke unburdened by the usual crushing dread. A different kind of warmth enveloped him, not the suffocating heat of fear, but a tender, almost buoyant sensation. He stretched, a low groan escaping him, and his eyelids fluttered open. Aaron occupied the armchair by the window, a book resting in his lap, his gaze absorbed by the page. The room's quiet was not empty, but companionable, a subtle resonance speaking of shared space and unspoken understanding. Blake observed him for a moment, the clean lines of Aaron's profile softened by the light. There was a quiet strength in his stillness, a grounded presence that had, in recent weeks, become an unexpected anchor in Blake's turbulent existence. Aaron must have sensed his watchfulness because he slowly lifted his head, his typically guarded eyes now holding a softness Blake hadn't witnessed before. A small, hesitant, yet genuine smile bloomed on Aaron's face. It was a rare sight, and it struck Blake with an unexpected force, a sudden, happy flutter in his chest that made him catch his breath. His own lips curved in an automatic mirroring response, a smile that felt lighter, less strained than any he'd managed in months. "Morning," Aaron murmured, his voice low, careful not to disturb the fragile peace. "Morning," Blake croaked, his throat still heavy with sleep. He pushed himself up, leaning against the headboard, a pleasant ache in his muscles. The flutter in his chest persisted, a tiny bird beating its wings against his ribs. What was this? He tried to pinpoint the sensation, to categorize it. It felt good, warm, like a secret. He cleared his throat, attempting to dismiss the unfamiliar feeling. "What time is it?" Aaron glanced at his wrist. Almost 8. He closed his book, placing it carefully on the small table beside him. "You slept well." It was an observation, not a question, tinged with a quiet satisfaction that Blake registered. Yeah, Blake admitted, a blush creeping up his neck. The memory of Aaron reading Treasure Island, his voice a steady drone, comforting and secure, resurfaced. He recalled drifting off, lulled by the narrative, by Aaron's proximity. He remembered waking briefly in the night, the weight of a blanket tucked around him, Aaron's hand gently smoothing his hair before he'd slipped back into sleep. That was it. That was the source of the warmth, the flutter, gratitude, friendship. That's what it was. It had to be. He'd always liked girls. Always. He'd dated girls, dreamed of girls, envisioned a future with a girl. This feeling for Aaron, this pleasant jolt, it was simply the profound relief of having a good friend, a truly exceptional friend, who had pulled him back from the brink. Right. He tried to convince himself, to confine the feeling to its proper mental category. But the box felt too small, its edges too sharp for the expansive warmth he felt. He looked at Aaron again, who was now rising from the armchair, his movements quiet and deliberate. The way the light caught the slight curl of his hair, the faint furrow of his brow in thought, the quiet intensity in his eyes. Blake found himself noticing details he never had before, in details that sparked a curious warmth. "Coffee," Aaron offered, already moving towards the door. "Please," Blake said, his voice a little hoarse. He watched Aaron leave, the door clicking softly shut behind him. The room, suddenly devoid of Aaron's presence, felt strangely cool, even in the morning light. The flutter in his chest, far from subsiding, seemed to grow more insistent. He lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. His mind, usually a chaotic storm of memories and anxieties, was now surprisingly clear, yet filled with a new kind of confusion. It wasn't dread, or panic, or grief. It was something else, something soft and sweet, and utterly bewildering. This feeling, this strange, burgeoning warmth whenever Aaron smiled at him, whenever he was near, it was more than just gratitude. It was more than just friendship. Blake closed his eyes, a knot forming in his stomach. His heart, which he'd always believed to be straightforward, predictable in its affections, felt suddenly foreign. A confusing landscape he didn't recognize. Pulling away. The unfamiliar warmth that had settled in Blake's chest lingered, a persistent hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. He found himself replaying Aaron's smile, the subtle crinkle at the corners of his eyes, the way his voice had softened when he'd asked if Blake was all right. It was a loop of sensory impressions, each iteration twisting the knot of confusion tighter in his gut. This wasn't gratitude. He knew the shape of gratitude. A quieter, more composed emotion. This was something else. Something vibrant and unsettling. A current that threatened to pull him off his carefully constructed course. The following morning, he woke with a start. The memory of Aaron's proximity from the previous evening, a palpable presence in the quiet house. A jolt, not of fear, but of anticipation. It was enough to send him scrambling from his bed, a sudden need for distance propelling him. He ate a hurried breakfast, barely meeting Aaron's gaze across the table, then retreated to his room. He spent the better part of the day there, ostensibly reading, but mostly staring at the wall, the pages of his book a blur. He found himself listening for Aaron's movements in the house, a peculiar tension tightening his shoulders whenever he heard the soft creak of the floorboards outside his door. Evenings became a quiet battle. The easy rhythm they had fallen into, Aaron reading aloud from one of Blake's worn paperbacks, now felt fraught. The intimacy of Aaron's voice, the shared quiet of the room, the comfortable weight of sleep pulling Blake under. It all felt too close, too dangerous. He started making excuses. "Just feeling tired, Aaron," he'd say, feigning a yawn, even as a pang of something akin to regret twisted in his stomach at the fleeting shadow that crossed Aaron's face. "Think I'll head straight to bed tonight." Aaron, ever observant, noticed the shift. Blake's casual avoidance, the way he seemed to subtly angle his body away when they were in the same room. the brief, almost imperceptible hesitation before he answered a direct question. It was a withdrawal, slow and deliberate, like a tide receding from the shore. He missed the easy silences, the shared mugs of tea, the comfortable domesticity that had begun to settle around them. He missed the vulnerability Blake had shown, the tentative trust that had blossomed in the aftermath of the nightmares. One evening, as dusk bled through the living room windows, painting the walls in hues of muted purple, Aaron found himself holding the book Blake had been engrossed in just days before. His thumb traced the worn cover, a small sigh escaping him. He longed to offer to read, to recapture the closeness that had felt so natural, but Blake had already retreated to his room, the door softly clicking shut. A familiar ache, one he hadn't felt in years, bloomed in his chest, the quiet sting of rejection, of a connection fraying. He told himself it was just a phase, that Blake was perhaps feeling better and needed more space, a return to his own independence. But the rationalizations felt thin, unable to staunch the quiet sadness that settled over him like a shroud. Blake, meanwhile, lay in his bed, the silence of his room amplified by the knowledge that Aaron was just on the other side of the wall. He could almost feel Aaron's presence, a warmth radiating through the plaster. He hated this feeling, this confusing mix of longing and fear. His mind raced, cataloguing all the reasons this burgeoning attraction was wrong, impossible. He was straight. He always had been. This was just a response to stress, to the profound comfort Aaron had offered during his darkest hours. It had to be. He clung to the notion, a life raft in a sea of bewildering emotions, even as the quiet ache in his chest told a different story. The distance he was creating was a shield, a desperate attempt to protect himself from a truth he wasn't ready to face. But in building that wall, he was inadvertently hurting the one person who had offered him unconditional solace, and the quiet tension between them grew, a palpable thing, thick and heavy in the air. Echoes of the past. The boisterous symphony of O'Malley's pub, pint glasses clinking and laughter roaring, was meant to be a balm, a steadfast mooring in the turbulent wake of Blake's new reality. He sat, compressed between Mark, whose stentorian voice hadn't mellowed since Kandahar, and Dave, whose perpetually wry smirk was a comforting constant. Their conversation drifted to shared histories, the absurdities of drill sergeants, the raw terror of near misses, tales that once flowed as readily as the cheap lager in their hands. Blake offered nods and forced chuckles, but his contributions felt hollow, and a performance he was increasingly botching. His mind kept drifting back to Aaron's quiet living room, the lamplight burnishing the spines of his books. He recalled the solid, reassuring press of Aaron's hand on his arm during a particularly dark evening, the soft cadence of his breathing as he slept, ever vigilant, on the sofa. Here, amidst his brothers, a peculiar, sharp loneliness pricked him. The camaraderie was palpable, their shared past undeniable, yet it felt like a superficial connection now. They missed the tremor in his hands when the jukebox abruptly blared, didn't register his eyes flicking to the exits, mapping escape routes. Aaron would have. Aaron always did. "You're quiet tonight, man." Mark's voice, a touch too sharp with concern, sliced through his reverie. "Everything all right?" Blake plastered on a smile, his facial muscles protesting the effort. "Yeah, just tired. Long week." He drained a long swig of beer, its bitter tang momentarily grounding him. He couldn't confide in them, couldn't articulate the gnawing unease that had taken root, the unsettling flutter in his chest whenever Aaron's name, even unspoken, surfaced. The dread wasn't about past horrors anymore. It was about the present, about nascent feelings he couldn't name and desperately wished to suppress. Later that night, Dave herded them to a house party, a sprawling, dimly lit chaos pulsating with bass and the mingled scents of stale beer and marijuana. The air was a thick, jostling human tide that raised goosebumps on Blake's skin. He felt like a sardine in a can, the walls closing in. He tried to engage, shouting over the din at a girl with glittered eyelids, but her words were a garbled jumble. Her laugh too shrill, too close. He retreated to the kitchen, a slightly less frenetic pocket where a few individuals murmured conspiratorially around a table. Even there, the noise was relentless, a ceaseless assault on his overstimulated senses. He leaned against the counter, tracing the condensation pattern on his sweating bottle. He felt the familiar constriction in his chest, his breath growing shallow. Panic. Yet, it wasn't the old, recognizable panic of a roadside bomb or a sudden ambush. This was different, infused with a strange, aching wistfulness. He found himself wishing, with a startling intensity, that he were back in Aaron's tranquil apartment, curled on the couch. The only sounds the rustle of a turning page or the soft hum of the refrigerator. He craved the calm, the predictable rhythm of their evenings. He closed his eyes, conjuring images of Aaron's hands making morning coffee, the meticulous way he arranged his books, the almost imperceptible frown he wore when Blake withdrew into himself. It was a vivid tableau, tugging at something deep within him. When he opened his eyes, the chaotic scene before him seemed even more alien. These were his friends, his former life. Yet he felt profoundly adrift, a phantom haunting his own past. He excused himself abruptly, muttering something about needing air. Outside, the cool night breeze was a welcome jolt. He walked, aimlessly at first, then with a growing sense of purpose, away from the pulsating house, away from the hollow laughter and the suffocating din. He yearned for space, not just physical, but mental. He needed to untangle the knot in his gut, the unsettling realization that the life he was trying to reclaim felt more foreign than the quiet, unexpected solace he'd found with Aaron. The thought of Aaron, instead of receding, seemed to amplify with every step he took into the lonely night. He was running, not from a threat, but from a truth he was terrified to acknowledge. A desperate hug. The bass throbbed, a relentless, rhythmless pulse against Blake's chest, offering no anchor for his frantic heart. Laughter, shrill and too near, grated against his ears, each syllable an unintelligible jumble. He felt submerged, observing distorted faces and gaping mouths, yet hearing only the ocean's muffled roar. Mark's casual clap on his shoulder sent a jolt of pure anxiety through him, making him flinch. Dave, clutching a beer bottle, was mid-anecdote about some college escapade, his eyes alight with nostalgic amusement. Blake attempted a smile, a nod, a feigned interest, but his facial muscles felt numb, unresponsive. His breath caught in his throat. The apartment air, thick with cheap beer and stale smoke, suddenly constricted around him, a suffocating trap. Escape. He had to escape. The thought was a raw, primal imperative, eclipsing all else. Excuses formed and dissolved on his tongue, unnecessary. He simply turned, navigating the periphery of their group, mumbling a vague, unheard apology. No one noticed. No one registered his departure. The realization struck a sharp pang, not of rejection, but of profound loneliness amidst the clamor. He navigated the crowded hallway, shoulders brushing strangers, each contact a tiny electric current. The front door, when he finally reached it, gleamed like a distant star. He wrenched it open, gulping the cool night air as if it were pure oxygen. The city's distant sirens, the hum of traffic, a lone dog's bark, a welcome cacophony after the party's oppressive din. He walked, then power walked, then almost ran, streetlights blurring into streaks of liquid gold. His mind was a frantic kaleidoscope of hollow laughter, meaningless chatter, and the pervasive sensation of utter alienness. Panic clawed at his throat, a familiar sensation now sharpened by a terrifying new edge. It wasn't the metallic tang of battle-born fear, nor the disorienting rush of adrenaline from a near miss. This was a deeper, more insidious dread, born of isolation and an unnameable longing. He yearned for quiet, a specific kind of quiet, one that hummed with unspoken understanding. He craved a presence, a single, unwavering anchor in the swirling chaos of his thoughts. His keys fumbled in the lock, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped them. The apartment was dark, blessedly silent save for the soft rustle of pages in the living room. Aaron. The name was a whisper in his mind, a balm to his frayed nerves. He didn't bother with the lights, drawn instead by the faint glow of the reading lamp beside the armchair. Aaron sat there, just as Blake had envisioned, engrossed in a book, the lamplight tracing the gentle curve of his brow. He looked up as Blake entered, his eyes, usually so guarded, softening with a question Blake couldn't articulate, but knew Aaron understood. Blake didn't speak. He couldn't. The dam of his composure had burst the moment he saw Aaron's calm, familiar face. He walked directly to him, his steps heavy with an exhaustion that transcended physical tiredness. Aaron lowered his book, a silent invitation. Reaching him, Blake leaned down and, without a word, wrapped his arms tightly around Aaron's shoulders, burying his face in the soft fabric of his shirt. He clung, with a desperation that surprised even himself. His breath hitched, then a ragged sob tore from his chest, followed by another and another. He felt Aaron's arms come around him, a gentle, solid embrace that offered no judgment, only solace. The tears flowed freely, hot and humiliating, yet he couldn't stem the tide. I don't know what's wrong with me, he choked out, his voice muffled against Aaron's chest. It was too much. They don't get it. I don't belong there. I don't belong anywhere. The words tumbled out, raw and incoherent, a confession of his profound disorientation. He felt Aaron's hand stroke his hair, a rhythmic, soothing gesture. He inhaled deeply, drawing in the unique scent of cedar and old paper that was uniquely Aaron, a scent that now felt like home. I'm scared, Aaron, he whispered, the admission a quiet plea. I don't know why, but I needed to be here, with you. A new quiet life. Aaron's arms tightened around Blake, a silent promise in their embrace. The clamour of the party, now a distant muffled hum, felt miles away, replaced by the rhythmic thud of Blake's heart against his own. He felt the tremor in Blake's frame, the shallow, quick breaths that spoke of lingering panic, and gently stroked his hair. It's okay, Blake, he murmured, his voice a low, steady current in the agitated air. You're safe here. You don't have to be brave right now. Blake's head remained buried in Aaron's shoulder, the rough wool of his sweater a surprisingly comforting texture against his cheek. The words, soft as they were, seemed to unlock something inside him, a dam holding back a torrent of unspoken fears. I don't understand, Blake whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. It was too much. The noise, the people. I felt like I was drowning, like I didn't belong. His grip on Aaron's shirt tightened, knuckles white. I just wanted to get away. I just wanted to be here, with you. Aaron simply held him, absorbing the confession, the raw vulnerability that Blake rarely allowed to surface. He felt a profound ache in his own chest, a mirroring of Blake's pain, and a fierce, protective instinct blossomed within him. He shifted slightly, beguiding Blake to sit beside him on the edge of the sofa, never breaking their physical connection. You don't have to understand it right now, Aaron said, his thumb tracing soothing circles on Blake's arm. Just know that you're not alone, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. It's okay to be scared. Blake slowly lifted his head. His eyes, still clouded with residual fear, searched Aaron's face. In their depths, he saw not judgment, but an unwavering empathy, a deep well of understanding that seemed to perfectly reflect his own turbulent emotions. The quiet strength radiating from Aaron was a balm to his frayed nerves. He saw the slight worry etched around Aaron's eyes, the gentle curve of his lips, and a wave of something profound and undeniable washed over him. It wasn't just relief, or comfort, or even friendship. It was a recognition, a completion. "Aaron," Blake began, his voice barely a whisper, yet resonating with a newfound certainty. He looked directly into Aaron's eyes, and in that gaze, the last vestiges of confusion and fear seemed to dissipate, replaced by a clarity that stole his breath. I love you." The words hung in the air, fragile and bold, a fragile bridge built between them. "I think I've loved you for a long time. I didn't know what it was." He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I want to stay. Here. With you." A soft, almost imperceptible smile bloomed on Aaron's face, a slow unfurling that reached his eyes, making them crinkle at the corners. It wasn't a triumphant smile, but one of profound relief and quiet joy, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. He didn't speak immediately, letting Blake's words settle, letting the weight of the confession sink in, allowing the profound intimacy of the moment to expand and fill the space around them. Then, with a tenderness that made Blake's heart ache in a new, wonderful way, Aaron reached out, his fingers brushing Blake's cheek before gently cupping his jaw. His thumb stroked softly, a silent affirmation. "I love you too, Blake," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through Blake. The admission, simple and direct, felt like the purest truth Blake had ever heard. "More than you know." He leaned in, a slow, deliberate movement, and their lips met. It was a gentle kiss, not urgent or demanding, but soft and lingering. A quiet exploration, a silent promise of everything that lay ahead. It tasted of vulnerability and hope, of fears acknowledged and futures embraced. It was a recognition, a homecoming. When they finally drew apart, their eyes met again, this time filled with a shared understanding, a glimmer of a future they were both now ready to build. Aaron reached for Blake's hand, lacing their fingers together, a natural, comfortable fit. The warmth of Aaron's skin against his own was a grounding sensation, a quiet anchor in the suddenly calm waters of his soul. Aaron squeezed Blake's hand, a silent question in the gesture. Blake returned the squeeze, a silent affirmation. Together, they sat on the sofa, the quiet hum of the city outside a distant lullaby, the glow of the lamp casting long, soft shadows around them. The silence between them was no longer a chasm of unspoken anxieties, but a comfortable, shared space, a sanctuary. The room, once just a refuge, now felt like the beginning of a home. Blake leaned his head on Aaron's shoulder, a sense of peace settling over him, unlike anything he had ever known. This was it. This was where he belonged. This was his new quiet life.